So I really, what I say, I became a photographer to meet interesting people, find myself in unusual places, and learn something new. So, you know, in the middle of all of that, where all those things intersect, is really it's learning something new. I'm not one of those photographers. I don't make pictures to put them up on my wall. I make photographs because it allows me to go someplace new, and it allows me to always learn something, and to sort of have every day a little bit different than the day before. Um, and you know, the best, I say it's not a real day on the job until I'm lying on my stomach or standing on a table somewhere. I've been doing this since 2001. I started my career as a staff photographer at a college in the Boston area, and then moved on to a corporate studio. Oh, looks like the presentation's starting. Getting up. So I'll just say next every time to go through the next image. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. Yep. Can you see it okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay.
So I'm going to do a quick overview of my work, and sort of the theme it's revolving around is the idea between the difference between taking a photograph and making it. And really, it's a matter of putting some thought into it, and having a reason for and thinking about a reason to make an image. Next. So I'm going to bump through these quickly. This is generally what I do for a living. I mostly photograph people. Next. And most, you know, it is DC, so it's a lot of people in offices, sitting in chairs in front of computers. Next. So a lot of my work, this is for a foundation, the Kresge Foundation. Next. Some advertising work for the Metro a couple years ago. Next. And this was an article for Science Weekly, I guess it was, and talking about a cover story about basically genetic diseases. Next. And what I really love about DC in particular is the locations, and it's a beautiful city with very beautiful light. This was for a college magazine, and this gentleman was he's working to change federal laws regarding minimum sentencing requirements. So he's hoping to take his case to the Supreme Court. So I thought, you know, as far as a location, you know, he's on the bottom step of the Supreme Court, which sort of symbolizes his journey. He still has a long way to go before he's in the building. But I loved the light peeking through, and took advantage of it. Next. Always in search of characters. This gentleman had something like 1,000 bottles of bourbon, and he basically single-handedly stocked the Jack Rose Saloon, which is in Adams Morgan, with a lot of their sort of exclusive and hard to find bourbons. And I found out he passed away a couple weeks ago. Next. Every once in a while, you can do something fun and a little bit comical. This is a shot alongside a video project for the Advertising Club of DC. Next. Next. So while we're waiting for him to get to the next image, we can talk about this one a little bit. So there's one of the things, this is a combination of sort of pre-visualized. Oh, here we go. Okay. Always on the lookout for different angles and different experiences. This was a climbing, a week-long excursion for Outward Bound.
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
We can.
We can hear you.
Okay. This was a climbing excursion for Outward Bound. Next. Another from that series. Next. And a little bit of out of order, but yeah, it's always, as I said, these are all real people you know, sort of doing in their environment, whether it's the office or out on the trail. Next. And another image, just, you know, people work. What I love is the variety. You know, people work not just in offices anymore, as we all know. You work wherever you can, in this case, during a commute. Next. And all sorts of jobs. This was at about 4:30 in the morning during an installation of a piece of public artwork. Next. So, you know, in the advertising front, this is a series of ads for Pepco, which involved a light stand, a tripod that's actually 27 feet tall. Next. And this just sort of shows, this is just some of the work I do. Next. Another one, this is, you know, one of the more unusual things I've been asked to shoot was these are bullets, and this is for a government lab in a basement up in Gaithersburg, where they actually sort of try to, you know, do everything you see from the CSI TV show. That's what they're doing, you know, studying ballistics. Next. It's the end of as a cover photo for a magazine. So not the work I typically do, but I always do enjoy the variety. Next. I photographed 5 books for National Geographic Kids, a variety of offbeat subjects. This, you know, the top one was using cats to sort of demonstrate science to kids. Next. You can see a spread from that. Next. So going to what I was talking about, the subject really is the idea of the difference between just taking a picture and making one. And I love that presentation that we just saw, the photos from India, because it really covered a lot of what I'm going to talk about, which is basically just sort of planning ahead and being very deliberate in your image making. So I had a college professor in school and you know, one of my first photo classes who said, you know, up to this point, you've gotten away with just taking pictures. Here, you're going to learn how to make them. Next. So taking pictures has a purpose. In this case, I had to remember, this is just the easiest way to remember the parking zone so I could add money to the meter later. But when you're taking a picture, you're just reacting to what's presented. You're not really making very many creative or strategic decisions, and you're just documenting something. And even the terminology, you're taking something, but you're not really giving anything of yourself. You're not giving any thought or time. And I've always thought this was an interesting, you know, double meaning to the word. You know, taking a photo is a very one-sided endeavor. Next. So when we talk about making a picture, it's basically we're talking about making decisions that are going to improve the quality, in either establish or alter the intent, or otherwise impose, you know, your will on the image or images that you're making. And this can be done, you know, in any of 3 times. It's either before, during, or after the image is made, or captured in the camera, I should say. So next. So in this example, this was part of a series for a client, and we needed to, it was a series of portraits of different CEOs of different startup companies. This was for an angel investment firm. And they were looking at, you know, they wanted portraits of the companies they've invested in, their CEOs, and they wanted something that tied them all together. So this was sort of when the tilt shift lens look was in, where, you know, you can alter it, and you can, it's often what you'd see to, you know, that makes will make a landscape look like a miniature. But you can sort of have a lot of control over what's in focus and what's out of focus. So, you know, that was a pre-visualized art direction that required us using that. So that was a decision that was made beforehand. During the shoot, the subject, this gentleman, was really, really camera shy. And he said, you know, I'm just going to we need to take the picture. I just want to wear my gorilla suit. And I said, okay, we'll do that, but let's compromise first. And so we took several of him with just like the gorilla gloves, and then we let him sort of transform, which made him happy. And some of that's just, you know, what you do to get a subject to relax. And then after the fact, there was, you know, just some minor retouching and just color corrections. So all those, you know, at all those stages came together to make the final image. Next. So in the pre-visualization, you know, it's a lot of, there's thought that goes into it. And sometimes you just see an image, see something you want to make a picture of, and there's not really any of this forethought. But you know, what I loved hearing about with that last example is just how much work went into selecting the subjects and getting access to those before the images were made. And I think that's a really important and often underlooked part of what we do. So you always ask, you know, why are you making the picture, and what's your approach? And, you know, what is the subject, and what could it be, and what does that mean? And, you know, what do you want to say with the images? Does it have a purpose? So for me, I'm a commercial photographer, which by definition makes me a sellout. You know, I am creating images for someone else, and I'm not creating art for myself. I'm creating something that has to be of use and has to communicate an idea or sell a product or have some, you know, some purpose for a company or an organization or another individual. You know, and so sometimes you want to know, what references do you have for the subject? Do you know what it looks like, for example? And in this case, you know, when I was a kid, I launched model rockets, so I knew what it looked like. I also knew that the subjects, in this case, my two boys, had no idea what it was supposed to look like, and were sort of nervous and scared about it. And you can kind of see their, you know, have their eyes closed in anticipation, and ironically missed the event. You know, and what visual references do you have for the style? Have you seen it before? Is there anything you're trying to emulate? Not all of these things need to come into play, but many of them often will. Next. So, you know, in pre-visualizing things, I always say there's always the pros, the cons, and the nos. So, you know, the things that are working in your favor, the things that are working against you, and the things you just don't know. And sometimes that's equipment limitations. Sometimes that's, you don't know exactly what the subject's going to look like or what they're going to be, or there may be time constraints, or, you know, it may not be the best time of day, or it might be a great time of day. Or there could be unfamiliarity or familiarity with the subject matter. You know, the latter of which, the familiarity with it, can really help make the difference. You know, people who have a background in dance make great dance photographers because they know what any movement is supposed to look like, and they can anticipate the actions and direct the action. Next. So in camera, some of the decisions you can make, obviously you can change the camera angle or the position, and you can move, you know, you can get higher or lower, or you know, move to the left or the right, and in and out. In some cases, you may be able to pose the subject or actually manipulate it. You can choose your lens. You can choose, you know, occasionally you can choose your lighting. You can often choose your, you know, shutter speed or the depth of field, and many things like that. And these are the things we all sort of know intuitively. Next. And in post-production, obviously you can control the cropping, the ratio, whether it's going to be a square. And sometimes this is good to think about ahead of time. If you know how you want something to look at the end, you know what sort of retouching or color grading or tone or finish that's required. And you'll know what you know, if you know how it's going to be displayed, if you're going to put it in a frame, if you're going to put it in your frame in your living room next to something else that's orange, this might be a good image. But if it's next to something red, it may not be a good, you know, it may clash. So just knowing all of those things helps inform your, you know, making an image rather than just happening upon it. Next. So I don't know if everybody's heard or knows Ira Glass, who is a radio host on public radio, and he sort of coined something called the taste gap. And I think this is something that we've all gone through, and it's basically the difference between what you know is good and what you yourself can accomplish. And what he goes on to say is, this is one of those things they never teach you in art school. And creatives often struggle with this because you get to a point you know what you want to do, but you just don't quite technically know how to do it. And he said the single biggest thing that an artist or a creative can do is learn to power through that and to learn to sort of bridge that gap and sort of work towards having the ability to achieve your what you pre-visualized. Next. So I'll do these quick. I don't know how much time. I know we got sort of a late start with the technical issues. So a couple examples of these. This is from some images from Vertical Rock climbing gym in Manassas. So I first learned about Vertical Rock because I was hired by Google to do a shoot there. And the owner said, "Oh, you should come back sometime." So I said, "Sure, absolutely." So my goal for this was to create just some interesting images that were different than what I'd done before. I really wanted to push, sort of break out of my comfort zone and achieve something different, something that was a little less accidental and more intentional in terms of the lighting. And so what I needed to show when you show climbing is you need to show height, that the people are up high. And this is all the stuff that was going through my head beforehand, before the shoot. Usually an element of tension, if it looks safe, it's not exciting. The personality and variety and a certain amount of production value. And so I knew I was going to have sort of healthy, good-looking subjects. What I didn't know was whether or not they'd be agreeable. And I had no time constraints. They basically gave me the run of the place. And while I had access to a scissor lift to get up high, the problem is you can't just move it around anytime you want to. So you really have to sort of plan out your shots ahead of time. And the last bit of trouble, what I did, the detriment, the thing that was working against me is, if anybody's been to a climbing gym before, they may guess this. And the reason why I chose this look, converting it to like a toned black and white, is next. By the time you get all the color, the grips and the tapes, it's a sort of a cacophony of color, and color images in this gym just don't look as good because it's too busy. The colors are too confusing. And there's too much of it. Next. So my inspirations actually for some of the pictures that are coming up, I don't know if anybody knows Josef Karsh, who is probably one of my favorite all-time photographers. He was one of the generation of photographers who photographed everybody from Bogart to Schweitzer to presidents. He did the famous one of the famous pictures of Ernest Hemingway, as well as Churchill. So he's sort of the person who, in the middle of the 20th century, sort of photographed everybody. And I've always admired his work, and especially what he does with hands. His use of hands in an image, I think, is something I've always admired. Next. Next. So bringing my own lighting to sort of take advantage of the shape, the different shapes and angles of the walls was one of my goals. Next. And using those shadows to sort of create different meaning, in which case I always think he's wrestling with his demons and frankly losing. Next. Next. And here I brought back the tilt shift just to try something different. I don't think it quite worked out as well as I'd hoped. Next. And then I wanted to do nicely lit portraits of some of the climbers, and just to get some of the variety. So using the chalk that they put on their hands, with a clap kind of creates a cloud of smoke. So taking advantage of that. Next. 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 So I'm going to go through these next ones pretty quickly because I think we're running a bit behind. So this was shot this past weekend. And the little paintbrush on the corner, I always call these projects wet pixels, which is basically you're seeing these before I've even finished editing all of the images. So I still have some to edit out, and I haven't even renamed the images yet. So this was a project. I had originally shot at this. It was a wilderness survival school that I photographed in 2013. And basically, the husband ran it at the time. Next. And it was, he was an Air Force, a military survival instructor. And the first time I photographed there, frankly, it was a bunch of dudes, bunch of guys. And next, it had a certain feel. They were really into knives and really into sort of the gear. Next. And, I got some good images, but what I was really curious about, and I've been needing to photograph some new work, post or in the middle of COVID, or sort of coming, hopefully, at the tail end of COVID, to sort of show clients that I can do more, that I'm still shooting, that I'm willing to get out there and able to get out there. It also served as practice as well. Frankly, I haven't been shooting any large projects in the past year. So some of this was kind of stretching my own, creative muscles. So I called up Dina, who's the owner, and found out that this weekend she was teaching a workshop. It was wilderness survival for women. So a similar subject matter, and I knew the subject matter, but a different set of images. So in this case, I could pre-visualize a lot of the shots I wanted because I'd already seen them. But with a different cast of characters, a different bunch of people in it, and this is a class, so I can't, I'm just there to photograph what I see as it comes about. I can't pose people, I can't move people around, so I have to, the pre-production, the pre-visualizing only goes so far when you're on the ground. So one of the things with shooting in the woods is you really need a shallow depth of field. Otherwise, as you'll see, the background, if that whole background was in focus, it would be just visually difficult to see what was going on. So that was one of the challenges with that. So next. So very different vibe, very different group. Next. Again, a lot of the same stories, but was interesting. So all the people photographed, I should say, have been vaccinated. So they had comfort around you, and 3 of them came as a group. So they had some comfort amongst each other, but there's still this sort of residual standoffishness. People are still almost out of habit keeping distances, and that made it difficult. And I myself had to keep some distance, so that made it a little bit more difficult. I was using longer lenses. I wasn't as close as I normally would be for projects like this in the past. Next. So sometimes you just have to sort of look for the different shots. Next. Yeah. Can't go wrong with a campfire. Next. So this is an example of, this is the image right out of the camera. And then next. This is generally what my style. This is pretty close to how I would, the final look would be. I might work on it a little bit more and get a little more texture out of it. But that's just sort of a little hint at the post-production. Next. And again, it's probably not my most successful shoot, but it sort of sets the stage that I will go back there sometime in the next couple months when the weather's a little bit warmer and the trees are a little bit more full, and actually photograph, pay some people to stand in as models. So this sort of gives me a good, almost like a sketchbook or a good foundation for that. Next. 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 So I'll buzz through these quickly. I was sort of inspired with this next group because of the theme that I was judging. And one of the things, that as I was judging them, I noticed some of the images definitely seemed more planned than others. Others were sort of opportunities found. Others were opportunities made. And so I just wanted to talk about that sort of with a similar body of work. So last summer, I know a gentleman who converted his basically his entire yard. He reintroduced, I should say, over 110 native species to Maryland, species that of plants that had not been there, because people have cut down all the bushes and the trees in that neighborhood. So he kind of reintroduced a little wilderness into his own backyard. So I decided I wanted to photograph that, and this is basically just a light, a flash. And I just have it on an arm, so it's really, really, really close to the subject. So it's actually overpowering the sun, and it allows me to basically treat his garden like a studio. So I had there at a macro 100 millimeter lens, and I was shooting at usually f11, f16, at overpowering the sun. Next. So I should say these were all handheld too. So kind of it's a lot of just gently moving back and forth to focus. Next. And I did some in my own garden. So these are my black raspberries, or raspberries and black raspberries. Next. It was just really fun to find shapes, where you'd often overlook them. Next. Next. I was very fascinated by looking under leaves in ways that we wouldn't normally look at or wouldn't normally see them. Next. Next. So this is sort of how I would approach one. This is basically just a picture of a flower. I can, just looking at it, I can tell I used, this is the first picture in the series, and I did use a flash on this. Next. And then I thought, okay, it takes a while. You kind of learn the subject and figure out the best angles. So I got down and hit it a little bit more from the side. Next. And I decided I really like that. So I kind of cropped in closer and really sort of fine-tuned the lighting. Next. And I thought what this flower needs is a bee. So I recruited a bee. Next. And you kind of kept working it until I really got the image I wanted. This is pretty close to what I was really looking for. The only thing I would say is that, that makes this from this is a good photo. I'd say it'd be a better photo if you could see the bee's wings. Bee is a flying insect, and that's kind of going back to the pre-visualization and what something is. That a bee is a flying insect, and to really illustrate that, you need to see the wings. Next. I don't like this picture as much visually, but you can see wings. Next. So the challenge yesterday I gave myself was to see if I could do this indoors. So this is a straight shot from my camera, no lighting, no changes. This is right out of the camera. And I challenged myself. I did not have a macro lens on the camera. So next. So one of the first things you can do is just an easy, simple reflector. or folded piece of paper. You can see how that adds light to that section of it. Next. So again, this is basically out of camera, just a little bit of, I think I cropped in just a little bit. Just working with a very simple, the blue and the green and the white. I just like the sort of minimalist colors. Next. And, I played around with it a little bit. I tried, slightly different angles. Next. Shooting straight down. Next. And again, these are all straight out of camera. So the next thing I thought is like, well, okay, let's try bringing a flash into the situation. So this is, it's a rather expensive flash, but it's nothing that couldn't be done with a regular, $50 flash and a long sort of cord that goes from the flash to your camera. Next. And, same thing. I basically just, in photography terms, this would be called a V-flat. And most V-flats you'd find in a photo studio are 4 feet by 8 feet, and they're taped together so you can stand them up and alter the lighting, and you move the light in different ways, and it has different effects. Next. So that's basically what I got from that. It was okay. It wasn't bad. Next. So I got in a little close and cropped in a little bit more after the fact and came up with this, which is, it's okay. Next. Then I decided I'll try doing a snoot. So if I don't know if anybody knows what a snoot is, it's basically when you wrap something, you really narrow the light coming out of a flash. Next, or a light in any kind of light. So as you can see the bright part there, that's, this was, I used what's called cinefoil, which is basically a aluminum foil that's has a matte black surface on both sides. So it's pretty crudely done. You could use this with a piece of black construction paper or cardboard. Next. So here you can see how it really limits and really narrows the beam. Next. And that was, something I tried. It's interesting. It's a little bit different. Next. So then I tried, I pre-visualized what I wanted. Given the time I had, this was about as close as I could come. And wasn't really that happy with it. And but I'm thinking, okay, well, I had, a really expensive camera, a really expensive flash, and a really expensive remote control that triggered the flash, and a somewhat expensive lens, and well, that's what I got. And then I had a terrible, horrible, no good idea that sort of undermined everything. So if you go to the next one, this is a little light you can buy at like Target, and it's basically one of those things that has a little stickum to it, and so you'd put it in your closet or a little your pantry or someplace where you don't have light, and it just takes AAA batteries and you tap it and it lights up. It's I think $5, something like that. And next. So this is really what I had imagined, and I made it with my iPhone and a $2 app on the phone. So this never hit the computer at all. And I think it just sort of shows that as much as you can plan everything in advance and you can sort of go through these steps of making a photo, sometimes you just have to trust your gut. And sometimes you just have to trust your instincts. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Great photos and excellent presentation. Really very, very nice. Can I ask whether somebody has questions now? We can have a bit of time for Q&As.
I have a question, Marissa. This is Natalie. Hi, Matthew. Thanks so much for that presentation. It was really, really helpful, and I like your ideas about pre-visualization. I think that's something you don't always do, and I think it's really important. I wanted to ask about how often would you say are you using off-camera flash, and what would be your advice to someone who's kind of just starting to venture into that realm? And I have a bit of equipment, I've used it a couple of times, but just wondering what your tips are on that.
So For a lot of the things I photograph, and I struggle with this sometimes because I don't necessarily want clients to know this. I often don't use any flash at all. And that's sort of my style. My personal style is I shoot wide open, so I shoot a lot of times around f2. And some of that is a habit I picked up mostly to hide backgrounds. So a lot of times I say when you're making a picture of something, you're either showing the background or hiding the background. And I often hide a bad background through out of focus images. So that's a trick that I use. So are you photographing? What are you photographing? Like when you think about using a strobe?
I'm kind of experimenting. So I'm using myself as a subject right now because
Yep.
I'm the one who can tolerate, my learning process. I'm also interested in doing some still life. So I know those are very different.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is LED lights are coming a long way. So if it's one of those things that you could have something plugged in, it's often easier to learn with because you're not, the flash, sometimes you end up sort of struggling with the equipment. Which is why I love just that, like I said, that little LED, I think was perfect for that scene. And I literally just aimed the iPhone, and did it. So, if you're photographing people or something bigger, then I would say a strobe, like a flash. But I would just consider, you can find any number of like LED, if you go to like a camera shop or B&H, and LEDs there are different than like the light bulbs you'll find, like in the store. LEDs that you'll find in the Target or whatever are actually pretty terrible for photography. But you can get pretty affordable sort of photo oriented ones. And I think that's a great way to learn, especially if you don't need a lot of power. So for still lifes, I would stick with that. Anything can be a light source. I use my iPad sometimes. And you get the screen on something white and you have a white light and it's a nice soft light. So some of the creativity for me is figuring out the lighting, not necessarily relying on something store-bought.
Great, thank you. I really liked your example of the little LED light. That was great. So thanks.
And as soon as I saw that, I had just finished the pictures on the new Canon R5, and I saw that little thing, and I thought it's gonna work, isn't it? I knew it was gonna work. And you call it was it Wizig? What you see is what you get. And it's a much easier way to learn.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Matthew, really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. Every thing you said. I have many questions, but I would just limit to one for now because we're running out of time. You do a lot of storytelling through your pictures. What are the major challenges you face when you decide about storytelling, or it just happens without any planning?
So depending on the situation, you can have a story in mind, and then you get there and it's completely different than what you were expecting. So for example, I did a story a couple years ago about a professional wrestling school in Virginia Beach. And it was literally like it was a wrestling ring, whatever, set up in almost like a storage unit. So there was like maybe a couple extra feet on either side. And the stories that I heard from there were wonderful. And I was expecting people just wrestling and all that. One of the students was autistic. And when he started, he didn't like anybody touching him. But he loved wrestling. He loved the idea of wrestling. And through this, within a couple of years, he's body slamming people. He's in headlocks. I mean, that's huge. It really allowed him to figure out a way to interact physically with people where he couldn't before. Another one of the wrestlers had a birth defect where he literally had no upper arm. So it was almost like his elbow was connected to his shoulder. And the guy who owned the school said, yeah, he came to me and he's like, oh, I really want to do this. I'm really passionate. I really want to, I'll work really hard. But there's something you need to know. I'm missing part of my arm. And he said, I can work with that. That's a shtick. And so the story that I came out of it was very different when the story I came into it. And it was a wonderful, actually almost touching, a group of people found someplace they really belonged. And so I think you can have something that you're going into it expecting it to be with some of the pictures from India, I could see, you go in expecting devastation and you find hope, and you find people who have started a business centered around hope or something. So there's always, you have to be flexible and willing for the story to change.
Thank you. Any other question?
I just have one question, Fergal here. When you're shooting the macro photos,
Mhm.
when you say you recruited the bees, do you use
I was
do you use
joking.
an agency or
I put out the buzz.
you put out the buzz? Okay.
No, it's one of those situations that if you're aware of your surroundings, I'm photographing flowers. There are bees around. Eventually, one of the bees is going to land on the flower. And sometimes it's like I have a lot of respect for wildlife photographers. I would never want to be one, because I know people who do that, and they will sit in a thorny bush for 3 hours waiting for the fox to come. So, or it may not. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for that sort of knowing your subject, knowing its behavior, and anticipating it to the extent that you can, and just being there when it happens. It takes a lot of patience.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is Estelle. I have a quick question. One of the photos that you took, that you showed at the beginning of your presentation, was a headshot of this man, and you said it was for maybe a Science Weekly magazine or something.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So it was very focused on the face, and then kind of out of focus on the sides. And I was wondering if you did anything post-production.
That was, well, I did things in post-production to that image, but not having to do with the focus. So that is that was shot with an 85 millimeter 1.4 lens, and it was probably shot at f1.4. So that means that very, very, very little is in focus, to the point where you have to be careful, because unless the person's looking right at you, one eye will be in focus and the other one will be out of focus. So I did that intentionally, because one of the side effects of his illness was that one of his eyes would just close. He almost couldn't open it, and it was, I think it was a muscle thing. And he's like, sometimes I'll go for 3 or 4 days without really being able to open that eye. And so I really wanted to, aside from the fact that he had just kind of striking eyes and a striking sort of look, wanted to sort of, when you're doing a story for a magazine, it usually helps to read the story if you're able to, because then you know this. And in talking to him, he brought this up. So then I could make that image. And then I would also tell the photo editor or whoever hired me, I did this because of that illustrates this reason. And you may be telling them something they don't know, but what you're doing is you're giving them caption information. So they could say, oh, that's really interesting. And then maybe they'll go, I don't know if they did in this case. They can go back and say, oh, and add that to the story or add that to the caption. So anytime you can expand on a story that's already written, I think you're putting yourself in a good place.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very striking. Thanks.
Anybody can feel free to email me with questions too.
I think that, or that that there are no additional question, but thanks for your offer to email you. So if any of us has some points or questions, we'll certainly take advantage of your kind offer. So can I pass the floor to Fergal for we are now going through the competition part of the evening. So can I ask Fergal to take over from here?